Okay, welcome back to What If History Restarted. This is episode 50, which is the halfway point, and also World War One. It's also the first episode with the entire world to be in the thumbnail, so, I thought that was pretty cool. But anyway, obviously, go watch the last episode 49 if you haven't, because, obviously it was pretty important as World War One did start. And so, of course, we saw that war broke out between the Square Alliance and the Star Alliance, which have had high tensions for many, many centuries. Obviously, these are probably like different forms of the Square and Star Alliances. Like, I doubt it's the exact same continuous alliance from like 1,000 years ago, but like, you know what I mean. So, the first immediate acts of aggression are going to be over here, as we see that Tuscany is going to start pouring its troops into little old Catalonia. However, and that is going to go pretty well for them, because while Catalonia is an extremely powerful country, Tuscany is the strongest country in the world. In fact, power rankings, we're gonna do those. Okay, and here are our top 20 power rankings for right now, the start of World War One. So, of course, Tuscany is the strongest country in the world, but Austria is a close second. And these two are the leaders of their respective alliances, and yeah, they're right on each other's doorsteps. Now, third is actually Mesopotamia. They have an extremely advanced military and a really high population, or a really high amount of manpower. That's because they force their people to join the military, but still. Fourth is Korea. They used to be first not even that long ago, but they have definitely taken a toll since they lost their American colonies. Fifth is Egypt, Oman. Sixth is China. 7, Denmark. 8, Golden Horde. 9 is Catalonia. 10 is actually the Gibraltarian rebels. 11 is Caucasia, or the Blue Team. 12 is Bengal, which is the Bangladesh Empire. 13 is Portugal. 14 is Yucatan, over here, so finally a New World country. 15 is Ukraine. 16 is Bulgaria. 17 is Estonia. 18 is Hungary, which is this country. I didn't really know what to call it, but that's the best I could do. And then 19, two other American countries. We have Delmarva, that's what I'm calling this. And 20th would be Alabama. So, yeah. Some honorable mentions would be Baikal and Siberia, and probably even like Cambodia, and then the Orange South China team. They're probably the next ones in line. Yeah, so, yeah, we're gonna continue looking. We're just gonna go from like east or west to east until we get to like the next major point event, I guess, in the war, and then we'll, expand outwards. So anyway, usually, since this is a revolution, and usually for a revolution I don't do like an invading color, I just have it be the same color. But like, just for simplicity's sake, we are going to we're gonna do an invading color. So I just pretend, so like this is almost operating like an actual country now, even though it's technically just a rebellion. So these guys are very powerful. They're actually not that far behind Catalonia themselves. Plus, they also have Tuscany's help, so that should be pretty good. They immediately put this vital city even under threat. And they also start a small push up here into Portugal. They also are managed to take this major city, so that's good for them. Woo. Over here in the colonies, Portugal just kind of abandons theirs. However, Catalonia has a vital city right here. So obviously they're not going to want to let that fall. So the Gibraltarians do try to take it, but they are pushed back, and the Catalonians go on the offense in their colony. We up here. So, like I said, Tuscany is the strongest country in the world. Unfortunately, they're surrounded by Catalonia, Belgium, Denmark, some of the other strongest countries in the world, and Austria, who is the second strongest country in the world. So obviously that's not too great. However, they are able to make a big push through Belgium. Well, the country of Belgium, but like actual Belgium is like here, but like the land owned by the country of Belgium. They take 4 whole major cities and separate a vital city over here in Brittany, and they also get very close to the capital. Up here in Denmark, though, the Danish are winning. The Danish did kind of have an empire here at one point, so they might be slightly used to this terrain. And yeah, they're going in like that, taking over this weird little panhandle. Over here, we see that Tuscany kind of focuses on the coast here. However, Austria, with their hugely industrialized army and manpower and all that, they are going to be pushing in over here. They roll through these rural areas in between the major cities before they then go on the offensive and cut off this major city and take it. We now go up here. These 2 countries are on the Star Alliance with Austria and Denmark and their friends. Or this belt, and also you and you're all in the Square Alliance, which is Tuscany's. But so is Sparta, but then Bulgaria, over here, they are in the Star Alliance. So, just a reminder. Anyway, Austria and some Danish troops, and maybe even some Estonian troops, are going to immediately send themselves into this country. This is the one I called Hungary, because it's kind of just I tried overlaying it on an actual map of Europe, and it's just a bunch of little pieces of countries. It was the biggest piece was Hungarian, so I went with that. But anyway, Austria manages to take this major city, and they also get onto the outskirts of this one, kind of panhandling out there. They try to make an effort to cut the country in 2, but that does not go successfully. Meanwhile, Estonia is pushing down here. Their only real task is to take this, at least try to take this vital city, which they are not able to do exactly, but they do get pretty close to it, as you can see. And there is the support for this city is dwindling. Over here, little Bosnia, they are in an unfortunate position. They are not too powerful. They did not make it into the top 20, and they are surrounded by the second strongest country in the world on one side, and another top 20 power over here, both of whom are mainly focusing in on them. So that's not good for them. Austria immediately starts rolling through this rural area again. They kind of just go with the same strategy. They go through the rural area, then they cut off a major city and take it. Then make another sweeping push up in the north, although they are unable to capture this major city. However, they do inch very close to the capital. And over here, Bulgaria is going to send in their troops. They meet the Austrian troops in this major city and are able to take it, and then sweep down here, and then they launch an assault upwards into the capital area. And with this being a 2-front battle for Bosnia, they are quickly knocked out of the war. This was a strategic decision from the Austrians and from the Star Alliance in general, because now this opens up a nice supply line from mainland Europe with all of these star team countries to very easily put their troops down here and other resources down into Bulgaria. Bulgaria might need those because they have quite a few square team countries on their borders, such as Hungary, who immediately threatens this vital city. This little green team, they obviously are pretty weak, and they're also being supported by this green country, not to mention that they have some Ukrainian troops as well. They especially want to make an offensive here because their capital is right on the border. But that does go pretty well, and they even manage to take this major city, although they do not go too far into the rural areas. Meanwhile, down here, Sparta gets folded. I mean, they're pretty strong. Well, not pretty strong. I would include them as another honorable mention, actually. However, they are not strong enough to withstand Bulgaria. And, up here. Over here, Estonia is actually like a fairly powerful country, mainly because they have the former capital of Finland, which, if you don't know, hey, there's a pixel of Finland right here. That's fun. But yet, if you don't know your lore, Finland was a very strong country, like I don't even know what you call it, sort of enlightenment. Well, not even then, like before then times, like the 1500s maybe. That's when they were at their peak. And yet, they were a very powerful country, however, they are gone now. But Estonia does retain their capital, so with that, they're actually able to make a substantial push over here into Ukraine, as well as into the green country down here, even taking this major city. And they do have the help of the Kaliningrad country, or Latvia, or Poland, Lithuania, whatever you want to call this. So this is our Europe front line now, and as we can see, it is very changed. Well, there's a lot going on. Also, Ukraine, doesn't really look like they've done that much, but they're mostly just acting as a sport team. That also goes for, Golden Horde is not in the war because they are not on the Square Alliance, but they're very much closely aligned to the Square Alliance, so they are also helping supply the Square Alliance. Anyway, we're going to move down to the African colonies again, and we're going to see that Tuscany is going to launch an invasion of Catalonias, which goes decently well. However, they are stopped at this vital city. Over in the Danish one, we actually see that it's the Danish who are doing a little bit better. They take 2 major cities and even cut off a vital city, although they do not take it. They then go up and encircle this lake, and then spread out pretty far across the relatively undefended colony down here. Over in the South American colonies, we're seeing that Tuscany has always been funding this colony very strongly for whatever reason, and so they are actually doing much better here. We see they push in through the border and take this major city on the coast, as well as these 2 down here, panhandling out. They even kind of wrap around here and get pretty close to this one, but are not able to take it. We also see that they just kind of generally do that. And there's our first little rotation done, so we're now going to turn over here. Mesopotamia. They see that the world is in chaos right now, as all the strongest countries, well, many of the strongest countries at least, are duking it out. So they're going to take advantage of that chaos, and they're going to go for who was their next target anyways, which is the blue team. And so they launch their invasion of here. Their military has learned from their past failures in the blue team in recent history, and so they are much more prepared this time. They immediately start pushing in over here, and this is where they focus at first, although they still maintain a small offensive over here. They just knew that this one wasn't going to go too far because the blue team was having a lot of their troops stationed here to protect their capital, which they just spent 600 years trying to reclaim. However, with that occurring, we see that Egypt Oman is going to stick with their promise. They promised the blue team that they would come to their support militarily if the red team were ever to invade, and so that is going to come true. That is impossible to see. There we go. Now it's 2 different. Sure. So they start pushing in here. They do like double spearheads to take that and circle all of that, and that goes pretty well. And first, this goes pretty well. However, now the red team troops are going to arrive there. And keep in mind, this is another two very powerful countries, third for Mesopotamia and fifth for Egypt, Oman. So the blue team is going to be like, hey, square team, you want to like help us here because we are like going to die, maybe. The red team will probably splinter them off and then move down to Egypt, Oman, and no one really wants that, especially because the red team is definitely more like star team aligned. They have pretty good relations with Bulgaria, and they have even had a few scuffles over here with Sparta for like these islands. So the square team is going to accept the blue team's off joining in the war. However, there's one condition: the blue team does have to like support the European front as well. So in response to this, we see that Egypt Oman is also going to join the Square Alliance, and that, of course, Mesopotamia is going to join the Star Alliance, which is probably good for them anyway, because now they can get support from Bulgaria. Well, more direct support. Well, Bulgaria probably stopped sending them support, but only because, they are fighting a world war currently. Anyway, moving back over here. The Catalonians continue their push through the colonies after they finally take that major city, and then jet across here to take this one and cut off the southern half of Gibraltar. I don't know what we would even call this, but this is what I mean when I say Gibraltar. And yeah, this area is kind of falls, well, not completely, but like, desert. So yeah. Up here, the Gibraltarians make a pretty ambitious push for this vital city. However, it is not successful, and they do get repelled slightly, although that's kind of what they were expecting. Not by that much, though. Over here, though, in Galicia, things are going a little bit better for them, as Tuscany is through their little port here, absolutely, like, doing some crazy bombing over here, or, well, just, like, amphibious warfare, I guess. And so, yeah, these guys are getting pretty weakened. And it's going to allow for Gibraltar to make a pretty big push up here, and even take the capital, leading to the capitulation of Portugal. The Gibraltarian troops are going to spill out a little bit more into Catalonia, but not too much. Anyway, over here, Tuscany has kind of just pushed in here. However, now they meet the Pyrenees, that's what it is. Carpathians are over here. But yeah, they meet the Pyrenees Mountains, and from there, because Catalonia is more focused on Gibraltar, and Tuscany is more focused on the rest of Europe, the front line is kind of stalemates there. Over here, Tuscany manages to take the Brittany major city, or vital city of Belgium, and then manage to take the capital even, and we see that the top leaders and political officials in Belgium flee to their British lands, probably just into some random, like, safe house over there. But yeah, this area is mostly just kept controlled by Danish troops, so that's that. However, Tuscany manages to push them back a little bit. However, they do lose this major city over to these guys. Over here, Austria is going to kind of go for a surprise attack almost, not in the sense, because, well, it's something that's like very like unexpected, I guess. What their plan is that even though they've been like kind of focusing on like slowly pushing out here, they're going to very suddenly make a massive panhandle going through this rural area once again, and reaching down and taking this major city, as well as meeting up with the ocean. Then make a series of landings along the Italian coast over the Adriatic, and this is very unexpected, and it goes very well for them. And part of the reason that it went so successful is that they did kind of have to give up a lot of their troops over here, so they actually lose one vital city as well as a major city, and also just a decent amount of land, and they have another vital city under threat. So yeah, that's not great. But over here, this is pretty great for them, because now Tuscany's capital is technically cut off. Of course, they can still go around by sea, so that's a bit of an issue, especially considering that they do take over Sardinia, but oh well. Over here, Bulgaria, it kind of becomes like Bulgaria versus Ukraine over here, with where we see that Ukrainian troops pour on through the green team, who manages, and so these two countries, the green team and Bulgaria, managed to make a pretty big push into this more rural northern area of Bulgaria. Over here, Bulgaria manages to repel the Hungarians, or whatever you want to call them, from this vital city. Not all the way out of their country, though. However, that might not really even matter, because they now start pushing into the Hungarian country. They also managed to cut off this section of troops, and so this now is able to fall over to them and Austria. And up here, Hungary also loses this vital city finally, as well as their capital. However, they do not stop fighting, even though they are reduced to not a whole lot of land. They even make a pretty nice push out into Bulgaria and take that, kind of just becoming this little rectangle. Up here, Ukraine starts sending more troops to help out the light green country, so this doesn't repel the invaders, but does slow them down and eventually halt them, with them even digging into trenches. We also see that trenches probably get made like right here, and maybe even like right here. But yeah, and then they do manage to do a very nice job pushing the Estonians out of their own country. They do not do a full-on push into Estonia yet, because that would be too risky to leave this southern front too undefended. Over here, the red team has continued to invade through the Caucasia, and their plan is going very well. The mountains obviously do pose a threat, an issue, but they eventually manage to kind of hug the coast, taking this vital city and going all the way up here. They then start making naval landings over in Ukraine, and even manage to take Crimea. Their support now starts flooding into Bulgaria as well, and they manage to make a small pushback against the dark green team. Over here, the red team troops start their invasion of Egypt Oman. They first try to go after the Persian coast, and I mean, they do a little bit, but it's just like way too developed and difficult to invade. But over here, they're doing a much better job as they fully push out the Egyptian Omanis, and they even now go over for a pretty decisive battle over here. So the red team troops enter this major city and cut down here. Then we have the battle of this Sinai major city, which is one of the three capitals of this union, because remember, it's called Egypt Oman because those are the two main countries, but there is that green one here, that Hejaz country. So technically it's Egypt Hejaz Oman. But anyway, over in this major city there's a very big fight, or battle to be more specific, and in the end the red team is successful, and they now take the Sinai Peninsula, which, aside from them now taking one of the three capitals, they also now make it so that there's no land connection between the two main halves of the Union. There is, of course, still, pretty short jump across the Red Sea, but still. You see that this kind of inflates out a little bit more, even capturing another major city over in Egypt, and one more over in Hejaz, as this entire area becomes red invaded. The red team now does all this, and they start sending a ton of their military down here. Eventually, they kind of just march through the desert like this. And then trenches and all that, which I don't even know if that works in the desert, but they're going to do something that's similar at least. And it is absolutely terrible conditions, and both of these countries' troops are getting extremely worn out because who wants to do that sort of warfare in the desert? That's where most of their military is, but some is still up here and going into the the blue team. And that is when little old, well, not little old, but big old Golden Horde is going to weigh their options here, and they decide that if they do not do anything, then the Star Alliance could win, which would give them a major, well, they already have a very big threat down here in the red team. Red team is significantly stronger than them, so obviously they would want that threat to not get any stronger, so they do not want to just not do anything. And if they join the Star team, then obviously that's just making it worse, so they could join the Square team instead. And this will allow them to hopefully beat back the red team and prevent them from, keeping all this land and power, which might allow them to become the new sort of power in this general area, the Middle East and Central Asia. So they, with their very close ties to both the blue team and Ukraine, as well as just sort of the Square Alliance in general, but especially these two countries, they go ahead and join the Square Alliance and enter in on this war. I'm just now noticing how close their color is to Egypt Oman's. But anyway, that is too bright. They begin to push down into the red team, moving across this rural area over here, where there's literally nothing other than these major cities. But all this in between area, there is literally 5 people here. They are stopped once they reach this major city, as well as this one, as they now start to get into more developed area, and also in other parts more rough terrain. We're going to turn our attentions back over to the colonies down here, where we see the Tuscany's invasion of the, what are these guys called? The Danish colony is going extremely well, as they take all of this now. However, the Egypt Oman troops are also now going up from this country, and so Denmark knows that this is not going too well for them down here. So they're going to make a little plea to these countries down here to join in. They kind of just bring up this whole oh, you guys hate colonies, right? So go ahead and free some of your fellow colonists. And now, obviously, it's kind of stupid because they also have a colony, but some of these countries are going to eventually take the deal, and we see a few new countries joining on this war over in here in South America, such as this gray one, this red one up here, and finally this purplish one down in the south. In response, though, we see that few countries are going to join the Square team to try, because they see that they are just more sided with the Square team, those being the Peruvian country, as well as the, whatever this is called, country, Ecuador, I guess. Anyway, moving over to the African colonies, we now see that Denmark manages to take this major city, or vital city, and with the help of little old Catalonia in their African colony down here, they make a very big push up here, even linking up with Catalonia's other African colony. Now this push is unnaturally good, and so suspicions start to get raised that maybe these guys are being supplied by another country, possibly a very powerful other country, who wouldn't already be in this war. So that's interesting. And then all of a sudden, we see that the red team is going to have a massive resurgence against Golden Horde, pushing them all the way back to here. They also push substantially into the blue team, taking them all the way like this. And yeah. Over here, though, Crimea is liberated, but yeah, it was more just of a distraction. But yeah, so the Square Alliance sees this, and they're questioning how the Mesopotamians are getting so strong. how the Star Alliance countries are getting so strong, really. And so they eventually catch a ship. Well, there's some ships going up into this area. They don't really know where they're coming from, but obviously they can't just raid them. So instead, they're going to do the next best thing, and using Egypt Oman, they are going to go ahead and invade this major port city. From there, they seize some of the cargo, and they see that there's a ton of weapons and foods and other military supplies, and of course, it is all from Korea. So, what happened here? Well, this Triangle Alliance obviously wants to become like the dominant alliance in the world, and they're doing a pretty good job at that. However, they have the issues of the Square and Star Alliances over here in Europe. And of those two, they are much more close with the Star Alliance than the Square Alliance. So they cut a deal with a lot of these Star Alliance countries to secretly supply them if the Star Alliance pledged their support of the Triangle team and gave them some land and money and resources after the war is over. So, with that now discovered, the Square team countries are obviously pretty furious. And so, they are going to officially declare war on all 4 of the Triangle Alliance members. And so we're now going to essentially see that these guys more or less just merge with the Star Alliance. So, and this is also another reason for this decision is because Golden Horde and this country have been having a little bit of a standoff over here, over a disputed border, and yeah, that was not helping with tensions. Anyway, with realizing that this might be their only opportunity, we're going to see that the band of former Upside Down Triangle Alliance countries are going to join in on the Square team. Well, they're going to kind of just the same deal as this, because this is like the Triangle Alliance, but just for simplicity's sake, we're making it the Star Alliance. So once again, same thing down here. But these guys are the Upside Down Triangle Alliance 2.0. Obviously, they're not actually called that, but you know. But we're just going to represent them with squares, because that's more simple and easy to understand. Because they're fighting on the same side as the Square team. And don't forget, this does include by column. And so with that, we can see that this war is really very quickly becoming a world war. It's going to become even more as a world war, because Alaska and Korea, you can see Korea still has this island over here. They've also been getting into some tough relations recently over the Bering Strait, and so these guys are very opposed to Korea, and not to mention they would also like some land from Denmark's colony, and so they're going to join the Square Alliance. So, Denmark is now a little bit... Denmark doesn't really care too much about this colony. However, some other countries might. So, such as Alaska. So that's why they're doing that. However, this is not going to be that simple, again, of course, because we're going to see that the Purple Prairie country has been getting along very well with Denmark. They've been trading a lot with their colony, so they're going to come to their support, actually, in this war. However, a lot of these surrounding countries don't really like this one. Mainly, Seattle, this one, and this one. Now, Seattle is like the native country, so their whole stance is that they're going to stay neutral on this war that does not concern them. That does not go for the aforementioned blue country down here, and this thing. They both join on the Square Alliance. With that, we can see that this war has expanded even more. It is now 100% a world war. So, we don't really have anywhere else to start but up here. Alaska pushes into the Danish colony pretty significantly, doing all of that, and all of that, and even some of this. Over here, we see that this war is mainly just between the Prairie country and these two countries. The Prairie country is about as strong as them combined, so it's a pretty even war. They immediately start pushing into this country, getting pretty close to its capital. However, this blue country down here is doing a better job, as they managed to take this major city. and get pretty close. Just push in general. I really don't know what to call this country. I guess like Minnesota. I'm gonna call them Minnesota. They start pushing in up here and getting pretty close to the prairie country's capital. We see that no other North American countries really want to join this war. Not even Delmarva or Alabama, who are two top 20 powers, just barely. Or even Yucatan, who was like a top 15 power, I believe. But yeah. Anyway, moving down here, we are going to see that these two countries, this one being for the square, this one being for the star, are going to start invading each other, with this one definitely coming out on top, as they start rolling into this country. The anarchy tribal country is probably taking advantage of all the chaos and like just kind of generally like bullying everyone else around them. Yeah. Over here, this country, which is kind of small, but it's actually like pretty strong for its size. It's stronger than these two countries, not combined, but like it's stronger than them individually. It starts invading Egypt Oman's colony, and it is followed shortly thereafter by this one, who is also going to start invading Tuscany's colony. Like this. There. So they just kind of expand out in all directions. Up here with this team's support, the Danish now are managing to push back the Tuscans, who are definitely kind of falling over here in Brazil. Moving back up to Europe, we're going to see that the Catalonian/Danish push in the colonies, supported by the Korean colony, of course, down here, is going to push up kind of heavily. This kind of looks like Egypt Oman is invading them, but it's not. And yeah, obviously it's not like they're actually like putting troops here, because this is the desert, but like this kind of becomes their sort of territory, if that makes sense. Better news though, Tuscany, now with Sardinia in their possessions, are going to take the Balearic, I think that's how you pronounce it, islands, and make a landing up here. And this is very bad news for the Catalonians, as we see that this vital city now falls. Over in Gibraltar, they have focused on like taking back all of this. However, we see that Catalonia takes back a decent amount of their land. They also just kind of have to occupy the colonies of their former Portuguese ally, who has since been capitulated. Bam. Over here, this invasion operation thing has gone very well, as we see that Tuscany's capital is now like officially encircled. There's also a naval blockade, like so. This major city is also encircled, and now this giant bunch of troops is also encircled. However, there is a lot of troops here, so they are not just going to die, because they do retreat to the city, so it looks like they lose a lot of land, but this is still like most of them. They're just retreating to this one spot. But yeah, they're holding out there very strong. Over here, Tuscany launches their invasion of the British colony of Belgium, which goes very well, and all the leaders are imprisoned. And with that, we see that Belgium is too going to capitulate, and they're now occupied by the Danish. Speaking of them, though, Tuscany is pushing back over here. Yeah, and that's largely because, obviously, this has taken a ton of troops from Austria, which has sort of weakened them over here. However, the red team is still kind of supplying this. However, they notice Austria notices that the red team's supports to Bulgaria have been decreasing by a lot, so they kind of confront them. And Austria is just really focused on taking out Egypt Oman, as well as the blue team and Golden Horde. So with that, they actually stop aiding Bulgaria, as they just focus in on their two fronts here, which could be a smart decision. However, so with the start team's lack of support over here to Bulgaria, because Tuscany is all focused in over here, and Mesopotamia is all focused in down here and up here. We are seeing that Bulgaria is not doing too good, and it's mostly left to just kind of be attacked by Ukraine. Through these countries, of course. So after Hungary manages to reclaim a lot of their former land, they now also started pushing into Bosnia, liberating it slightly. Not all the way, but a little bit. They now launch a big old invasion up here, which goes pretty well. They're not able to take this vital city, but once again get pretty close to it. And we now see that the Ukrainians now make a pretty big push up here. Bulgaria is a strong country, however their military is experiencing some very bad logistic failures because their generals are all stupid. Up here though, we do see that because they're sending, it still takes a decent amount of troops to beating that, so we do see that the Estonians are able to resume their push down to the light green country. Kind of regret putting two green countries next to each other, as well as the Kaliningrad countries. And so we're going to see this country eventually gets capitulated. And there goes a square team country. Now we're going to stay over here, I guess, because these guys are still putting a lot of troops in here. So over here, they're still sending up a decent amount of troops to the blue team. They do manage to capture the capital and push them pretty far up here. However, they do not capitulate. Over here with Golden Horde just kind of stays in and pushes back a little bit, taking over all of like the Central Asian area. Over here in Egypt, Oman, the front line is like completely just dug in. This is like the most brutal area of the entire war. There is a lot of death, and it is very terrible to be a soldier here. Anyway, moving over to Asia now, you see that the Bengal country is going to quickly start sweeping through the two Indian countries, taking out the blue one very fast, and moving on to the gray one, although this one is slightly supported by Egypt, Oman, mostly just like the natives who live here helping it out, so they're not exactly, so Bengal is not able to take it all over. They do also start pushing into this Egypt, Oman colony, so there you go. Yeah. Over here, Cambodia is actually managing to push Bengal back slightly. They take these two major cities and start pushing down this peninsula, and obviously this with support from these guys. However, there is two much larger issues over here, and we can see that come into fruition very quickly as the square team starts to not do too well over in Asia. The Chinese pretty quickly wipe out the blue country here, where like 5 people live. They then start moving to the orange country, as they almost take the capital, but not fully. There's a weird little dot here. It's on the cities layer. And yeah, that's not too great, especially with Korea's help. My arm is asleep. Okay, but moving back up to Baikal, this country is in a very awkward position. However, they did just try to they were like unsuccessfully invaded not too long ago, so maybe that's something kind of good for them. Korea starts to push in over here. China tries and once again fails to get across the Lake Baikal. Them using that as a shield has helped them by a whole lot. Over here, these guys start doing this pushing in as well, as we do see that their capital is now cut off, but very well defended. Over here, Golden Horde has started pushing into the Siberian country. Not too much to say there. Korea is doing not much else though, as they're still revving up their navy, but it is pretty much ready to go. The only other thing though, that this country, Bengal, that's what I call them. You can barely see that. Let's choose this one maybe. Sure. They are now pushing into the Vietnamese country. Now, I guess we're gonna move back over to North America. We see that the Prairie Country is going to finally take Minnesota's capital, as well as their entire northern area, with the help of some Danish troops up here. However, there is one small issue up here. Let's just fix that, which is that the Danish troops, or the Danish people that live here, they don't really want to be part of Denmark anymore. They just kind of want to be independent. So the colony declares independence mid-war. They even cede over some land. Well, they pretty much just surrender. The colony surrenders against Denmark's orders. That's how I would describe it. This leaves these guys fairly alone. So we now see that Alaska is going to push in from the north here to try and help out their amigos. Because, everyone speaks Spanish in Alaska. And yeah, they start doing this. And the blue team now pushes up here, which is not too great for them, for the Prairie Country. Although, to be fair, they are pretty focused in on Minnesota right now, as they reduce them to just their southern part. They're very weird, long, stringy sort of country. Over here, this country is continuing to help out these guys, the Danish colony in South America. These guys have not declared independence. However, there's one small issue with these guys, and is that they hold a lot of different, very culturally different lands up here in the Caribbean, and these guys do not want to be part of them. So we see a couple different rebel groups pop up over here in the Caribbean, declaring their independence away from them, from this thing. So we see a Cuban one, we see this one, and we see this one. So yeah, that's a bit of an issue, and these guys kind of start crumbling, and they have to recall a lot of their support to Denmark, and yeah, now Tuscany's pushing right back into Denmark's colony. Down south here, this country is mostly focused in on invading into the Egypt-Oman colony, so they are doing that pretty well. They meet the outskirts of that major city. This does require them to pull out some of their troops from this Peruvian country, who manages to reclaim a decent amount of lost land. This country up here captures this vital city, the only one in Egypt-Oman's colony down here. So, yeah. I guess we're just going to stick over here. These two are on the same team, so obviously there's nothing to look at down there. And also, most of Africa is just controlled by the Star Alliance. And so from Africa, we see a pretty big push-up be made, and they meet in this major city. However, they actually repelled by the Square team, who wins that pretty big battle. Speaking of pretty big battles, the Gibraltarians coming up from over here, and the Tuscans come in from over here, and they managed to capture this vital city. Let's make this look normal. And so with that, we can see that Gibraltar and Tuscany's colonies, I get it now. Catalonia's colonies are kind of cut off from the mainland, which is not too great. However, this did allow for them to break the stalemate over here, pushing back the Gibraltarians, and even reclaiming Catalonia's capital and another major city. Still stalemated over here. Over here, Tuscany's Corsica is taken, as well as Sardinia, back in the Balearic or whatever islands. So Tuscany's capital over here is starving. The leader was before, right when the war started, they were evacuated to a more safe area, down here. So he isn't under threat. However, this is obviously not a good position to be in for the millions of people living in the city who are starving to death, and it is not fun in this city, the capital of the strongest country in the world. Speaking of them, though, they are still the strongest country in the world, so they push a lot of this northern invasion back. So that's something. However, they are not able to invade into mainland Austria. Over here, the Danish make an effort to reclaim the capital city of Belgium, but in this major battle of the war, the Danish are successful, and so they now reclaim Belgium's former capital. All the way like this. And from there, they do continue to push out to Tuscany by a decent amount. But once again, this war is extremely hard to fight because, I mean, you're pushing into the strongest country in the world. Over here, poor little Bulgaria, who's been sort of abandoned by their allies, are not doing too good, as there's a ton of revolts against their pretty authoritarian government, and their armies have extremely low morale and very high mutiny, allowing for all this to be happening. Over here, Austria does manage to actually, once again, go into Hungary and take their capital and another major city. However, they are still decently large. They then also make a spirit down here and reclaim the capital of Bosnia, as well as finally taking back that major city and some extra land. From there, we can see this pretty big push here has been pretty nicely successful. This country has shifted over a whole lot. It's literally like this. It's like this thing, and moved down to being this thing in this war. And over here, the green team is doing much of the same as they push back here. They do not threaten the capital that much, though. They do take over the Sea of Marmara areas. Over here, though, Mesopotamia just kind of has like a very strong defensive line over here. They aren't really bothering with Bulgaria because they are most focused over here. However, even that is changing because the blue team with Golden Horde's support is actually pushing back the red team. Who would have guessed? It's mainly because Egypt Oman is still taking a lot of red team's military and troops to beat. So with that, we see that these countries actually managed to, well, they're mainly focused on pushing, liberating blue team territory rather than pushing out their already existing invasion down here. So we see that the red team gets a tiny bit of land back there. But yeah, and we see that an increasing amount of troops from the red team are diverted over to Egypt Oman until eventually the blue team is fully liberated. With that, we see that the red team sets up a very heavy defensive line up here, but notably there's nothing offense. So this is completely defense. They do not have any intentions of pushing in again. Yet, at least. But yeah, they're just holding this front line with all they can. Speaking of doing things with all they can, all of their offenses down here. So they push through the desert trenches and go through a whole nother round of invading. They get all the way to here in Egypt, and then all the way to here in Arabia. They're not able to take the Qatari major city. Qatari, I don't know how you would say that. And they make a small push into the Persian coast area. Notably, though, they have not taken any actual coast, except for this, I guess. But yeah, because the actual coast is I don't even know how to describe it. It's giantly rich. So once they make this huge push, we now see that troops are once again stationed. This is just throwing. This is like Soviets pushing back the Germans in real life World War II. I mean, it's just throwing people at having a ton of people as an obstacle and solving it by throwing even more people at them. So this war over here between these third and fifth strongest countries in the world is going pretty deadly for both countries. Over here, the colony of Egypt Oman collapses over to Bengal, who also manages to retake all of India. Over here, things are not looking good for Southeast Asia, as we see that the Chinese, Koreans, and Bengalis now crush all these guys' dreams, as they now all kind of just swoop in here, because there's not a lot that these countries can do. Now, obviously, these countries are very strong and very nationalistic, so pushing in here and occupying them is not that easy, actually. It's a lot harder than they would have expected. The for Star Alliance countries in Asia. However, they do still end up doing it. It just takes a lot of manpower and all that. Especially because for Korea, some of their more distant colonies down in Australia, New Zealand, and all that are getting a little bit rebellious and requiring extra support to put down. Over here, Baikal finally gets folded, but once again, we know how tough Baikal was in like the previous war that these guys just recently tried to fight against them. So this also takes a ton of troops. However, these guys do manage to push the Koreans and the Siberians and a little bit of Chinese now also start pushing into Siberia. Not a whole lot. I mean, that looks like a lot, but like considering how dense Siberia is, it's not really a lot. But yeah, they start pushing in there, but they don't really go too far with it yet. Over here, survivors from the square team countries, such as Indian countries and the Southeast Asian ones, they essentially just beg some of these countries over here to join on this side of the square team. A lot are pretty hesitant to do so, but two of them do finally accept. Those being the two Himalayan countries, I would say. The two Tibets, maybe. No, that's definitely not Tibet, but this one's Tibet. So yeah, these guys have had very high tensions with the Bengal Empire historically, well, really just in the past, like, century or so. So yeah, they're pretty angry at them. And now the Himalayas are here. However, these guys are also helping support Golden Horde, so that is their main purpose, really, and their promised land if they eventually win. If the Square Alliance eventually wins. Moving back over to the Americas, we see that the Prairie Country is now not doing... Whoa, that's not what I meant to do, but I mean, it's essentially what's happening. There's widespread protests all across this country, and yeah, things are not looking good for it, and it is eventually completely defeated and partitioned between all these invading countries, Alaska, Minnesota, and whatever you would call this. Is that a lake? Yes. So the war in North America was pretty short-lived. It is already over. Over here, this country's government is completely collapsing. Rebels are popping up all over the place. Obviously, this sort of ethnic groups breaking away was just like the first sign. Yeah, we have a ton of people going away. And now, to be fair, this is definitely heavily supported by the Ecuadorian country over here, who is, well, heavily supporting this. And honestly, I think it's probably more fitting just to make it, like, invasion of these guys, because it might as well be with how heavily they're supporting these guys. And so, yeah, that's not too great for these guys. Their government, like I said, completely collapses. And so, eventually, they die. And so, eventually, the Danish colony down here dies. And that just leaves these two countries down here fighting, well, yeah, the gray, this country, and the purple, this country, as the ones fighting for this Star Alliance down in South America. Over here, we see that these guys meet up like that. And then we actually see that the Egypt-Oman colony capitulates over to these guys. Meanwhile, over here, Peru pushes back in the more northern area, while these guys push up in the more southern area. I guess western and eastern would be more accurate, but oh well. Let's also just, like, do this. Yeah. Over here, we see that the Tuscans make pretty much just a surprise invasion of Gibraltar. It's mostly, they go through the Balearic Islands once again, and then they join forces with the Gibraltarians to and take over this vital city. With that, they make another naval landing up here in the north, which was not expected. Obviously, these guys were preparing for something right along here, but nope, these guys decided to trick them and go up here in the north. And from there, we see that a very major turning point in this war occurs, as all of the Catalonian forces down here are eventually forced back to the capital area and surrender. And with that, we see the capitulation of Catalonia. Now they do have their colonies still, so these are going to have to go under the control of Denmark. So that's going to be interesting looking. Giant green blob. Although, we'll give this over to you, just to make things easier. Just say that, Gibraltar invaded Portugal's colonies. And I guess this one can just be under Korea's occupation. So there we go. But yeah, the entire northern area up here is what's being protected, is what's owned by the Square Alliance, and this is the much more important area. However, it is a very small amount of area compared to this, so which is actually better to have. It's more like equal, really. And even then, we see that it's going to get slightly tilted again, or even more, as we now see that Denmark pushes up even further and gets pretty close to reaching the coast, although they are unable to do so. Now, obviously, this took a ton of troops from Tuscany, so with that, we can see that Denmark is once again pushing into Tuscany. I would have guessed. All of these troops rain on down here, and yeah, Austria starts doing their thing again as well. And the city down here is still starving. Meanwhile, this group has been very not good for a while. However, they make a run for it. They run to this major city and camp there for a few days, and then they run down here into Bosnia and eventually meet up with Slovakian troops. So, with them now meeting up with the Slovakian troops, we see that Bosnia is essentially just liberated, and yeah. However, Austria is a very powerful country. It's just focusing in a lot of that to invading Tuscany, as we can see here. Also getting pretty close to two major cities. So with that, they have all of Slovakia, almost all of it, under their control, but not quite all of it. Slovakia just will not die. But who will die is over here in Bulgaria, because their people are completely overthrown the government, and eventually the country just straight up collapses, and from there it's just a matter of, occupying land for their invaders, I should say. So Sparta is also liberated. Over here, we see that the defensive line from the red team is still holding up, and this Tuscany is begging them to please just send support up into Europe, but red team is just way too adamant about taking out Egypt Oman. Their own propaganda against Egypt Oman has started to affect even the leaders who are now brainwashing themselves, essentially, as they are now just hell-bent on getting out Egypt Oman because they believe that Egypt Oman is their greatest adversary. So once again, the stalemate is broken. Another massive push is made. This time that Egypt Oman loses another one of their capitals, this one being Egypt's, which is probably the largest in the countries. The largest of the three capitals, I should say. They also have this vital city put under threat. So that is going to be looking like that. Let's not forget this pixel. Or this one. Over here, they also managed to take two vital cities, one in Qatar and one over here. And once again, we see the same thing happen. More stalemates, more trenches, more low morale, more everybody dying. But notably, they managed to break through the Persian coast, sort of, finally separating it into two halves. They also reclaim this, I guess. And yeah, they take another major city from it right there. From there, just kind of push it down to be more just the cities. Over here, now that Baikal is taken, and that they really don't want to go through the whole Pacific, the Koreans, Chinese, Siberians, and Bengalis they gotta do something in the war now, otherwise their people are going to get angry at them for not doing anything in the war, which would also be stupid considering how powerful these guys are. I mean, I'm saying the countries, these guys would be stupid to not do anything, because they are really powerful. They should obviously use that power to do something. And so we see that these four countries are going to formulate their grand plan, which is essentially reverse Barbarossa. And so they plan to invade through here, through Siberia and Golden Horde, take out the blue team, and with the red team's help, take over all of this area, and from there just push outward into Europe, and eventually win the war. So eventually, Operation Reverse Barbarossa begins, and yeah, it is a ton of troops are just shoved over here into the Siberian bitter cold wilderness, as they now start to meet up with a few major cities, and that is not great. Now they make a spearhead for this vital and this vital one. Now some make another spearhead just to reach out here to this lake, and then they pincer movement this one and take it out. From there they bulge out here, and eventually wave is kind of in a wave. They do that. Then the spearheads all coalesce into one massive spearhead, which juts out straight here and goes straight for the capital of Golden Horde. And they also take some more land up here. Golden Horde's completely surprised by this, and Austria's like, "Go, Red Team, now's your chance. You can finally invade Golden Horde." Red Team is, of course, still, they're a little bit preoccupied with their whole kill Egypt Oman thing. Over here, the Ukrainians are mostly helping out the Golden Hordeans. However, with that, we now see that the largest trenches in all of history are now dug. Well, maybe not like all the way across here, but like all the major areas where they would need to be. And those trenches last a lot longer than expected, and eventually the winter comes. Oh boy. So, just like in our timeline, we see that the winter is absolutely terrible. On both sides, a ton of people dying. This is probably just as bad as the trenches, or whatever they're doing. Probably, like I said, this is like desert, so I don't even think you can do trenches. Like, whatever equivalent to trenches they're doing down here. So, yeah. But eventually, these people are, they're most of them are, since Siberia is, like, not really that strong, they're not even in the top 20. Most of these people are from Bangladesh and China and Korea. They're used to very warm climates. Meanwhile, a lot of these people over here in Golden Horde are used to much colder climates. So, they are a little bit more adapted to this. And so, while there's heavy casualties on both sides, we see that eventually the Koreans, or the Asians in general, Korea, Asia, Siberia, Bangladesh, they all now know that they kind of have to do something, so they make one big spearhead down here for the capital of Gibraltar. And in this battle, we see that the Gibraltarian people are heavily armed, and they equip themselves in tons of little militias form, and eventually the very nationalistic Golden Horde people in the capital manage to repel the invasion. From there, we see a sprawling network of panhandles, mostly formed out of small militias that are being helped out by the official military, form out, as we essentially just see this weird spider web forming and taking all the cities. They link up, they separate areas, they encircle troops, they encirclements, they start just basically doing some nice tactics up here. With help from these two countries. These two is really, they're making this war winnable. But eventually, as spring comes in, we now see that with extremely high morale, the Golden Horde people managed to push the invasion of Reverse Barbarossa all the way back to their border. And this is a crushing loss for all of the Asian countries, who are now severely depleted of their troops. And now we're going to go back to, North America's gone. And over here in South America, we see that the Tuscan troops down here, paired with, pretty much just all the people, the Tuscan government makes a decision. They promise that they will release the Brazilian colony if they are, good fighters, and a ton of people join the army. They basically just set a quota of, native Brazilians. All of you need to join the army, and if enough of you join, then you'll be free after the war is over, of course. And surprisingly, this quota is much more than met. It is significantly larger than even what they were expecting, even what they would have hoped for. So with that, we see that they now, with a huge surge in troop numbers and manpower and all that, they are now very easily able to wipe out all South American fighting. And with that, another front is just closed, and World War I is reduced back to the old world, unless you count, Oceania as being the new world, which you probably would. So, but it's out of the Americas. That's what I'm trying to say. And just to make things a little bit better, another region that Operation Reverse Barbarossa was failing is because the Alaskans, paired with some troops from both this country and Minnesota, started a surprisingly large invasion of this area of Siberia. And this invasion moved through these areas, which they tactically chose because these guys are formerly of the sort of Hokkaido country down here, so they are very low resistance, and a lot of them even joined the army. And so with that, we saw that there was a very big pushback here, which required a ton of Korean troops to push back. Even then, it was still not pushed all the way back, just only to, like, here. Over here, we see that similar things happen, as once again, people in the Golden Horde area, people in the Gold Coast area around here, remember there was that huge Gold Coast Caliphate that formed, so obviously these people are not too keen on being colonized, and so we see that rebels are going to pop up here as well, going for, freedom. And this rebellion starts growing massively, and surprisingly though, the Danish are able to put it out. However, that's a big issue now because they just lost a ton of troops doing that, and they kind of see that this is such a massive area to keep down, and they have a much bigger thing to worry about, being that they are currently invading the strongest country in the world. They kind of just recall all these troops eventually to their homeland, and so we see that this entire area is now finally freed and actually becomes occupied by the Square Alliance. So yeah, this honestly, this doesn't look like, this kind of looks like it would be a big loss, but really it's not, because this just wasn't that important. And we see the same thing going on down here, as Korea also was forced to give up these colonies, relinquish them, because they are way too focused on stopping this, and also attempting to stop this. Of course, throwing more troops at the winter did not kill the winter. So, yeah. And throughout all of this, Mesopotamia is still refusing to send aid, as once again, they start another massive push down here. They take out the entire African half, as well as not the entire Arabian half. They reduce the Arabian area to just a very small area. They even now finally managed to take over the Persian coast. But yeah, it takes a lot of death. And so eventually, by the time that they get around the circle, we see another trench be built. And yeah, things are not good for anyone. Over here, the Tuscan troops are able to make a substantial pushback over here. The Danish troops tried way too hard to try and keep down their colonies up here, and all of that trying to keep down those colonies that really weren't that as nearly as important in this war as they thought they would be, was really a huge mistake, as we now see that they are left with barely any troops who are tired of being sent literally all over the world. And so, that's not too good, as they officially get pushed out, and they now, for the first time in this war, somehow, have their homeland invaded. It's not too substantial, but still. Over here, Tuscany they start kind of pushing back Austria, but honestly not even by that much. As notably, Austria is finally able to capture the Tuscan capital, is a huge blow to morale. However, the Tuscans had such high morale that honestly they're still just at fairly high morale now. Over here, these guys kind of, do their thing and make a surprise attack up here, mainly led by the Ukrainians. This surprise attack is highly successful, as they managed to cut Estonia in two and eventually take their Finnish former capital area, which is the main area that they needed to be strong. So pretty quickly we see that they get rolled through by the Ukrainians, who are with a ton of young men signing up for the army because these guys really just huge wave of patriotism with all the death going on. Down here in this country, we see that they are also troops stationed in this country, in Bulgaria and Sparta and even Bosnia and all that. They now all come up here and start to liberate this country, which is eventually successful. Austria takes complete control over that area occupied by these guys. And that's for good reason, as now we see that these guys really aren't actually that strong. They now have their capital immediately taken in a very humiliating defeat by the Ukrainians. Now start getting pushed back even more and eventually capitulate. So that's not great. And Austria is now forced to occupy all that land. Over here, the Danish are getting pushed back even more as they lose that vital city and are now have their capital gates met. And after everything, this defensive line is mostly being held up strong, as the blue team, a top 20 power, was also sending their troops up here, because obviously that was a pretty big invasion, so they needed some extra support. It was mainly from the blue team, who really didn't even have to worry about the red team anymore, because these guys were really just defensive, so the red team's kind of stupid as well. Over here in Asia, we see that Golden Horde troops are, just pushed back this massive invasion, and they are just not going to stop marching. They march all the way across Siberia. Obviously they don't, but they make the good idea of not actually going up here that much. It's just, like I said, with the desert, it just kind of becomes their it's more recognized as their occupation zone. From there, the incredibly sparsely populated Siberian country falls almost instantly. We see that the Baikal people rise up and are actually, they rise up. So we see that this huge rebellion occurs, which makes Baikal very easy to liberate. Over here, the North American troops, who are joined by probably the Californian countries, the purple one, the gold one, and probably the pink one and the teal one. All these countries joined the war, so I guess technically North America is not over. But yeah, they help join in on this invasion in a very extremely risky but very successful move. They now meet up with the Golden Horde's troops up here in the north, sort of north, which makes the actual north become, once again, kind of it's more under their control than Korea's. We now see that sweeping rebellions now occur. There is a ton of Aboriginal people across all of these islands, and none of them want to be part of Korea. This is finally their time to revolt, as all of this starts to break off. Over here, we need another new color from this, because they are now invading with the help of a lot of these people. They take this vital city down here, and make a big old spearhead like this. Give me 1 second. So they spearhead across to this major city and take it. And I just realized this is the exact same color as the capitals, exact same hex code. So that's fun. But yeah, they take it, and they now make their spearhead all the way across here. And this area is very quick to fall. And this is because a lot of these people were also formerly of Baikal, they, I believe, probably still are. Well, it's still a very large minority, like 40% Baikal people. So they all like rise up and are joining this army. The same goes over for the Korean half, although this is mostly with the Hokkaido people, less rather than the Baikals, as Korea is pushed back to just their mainland and some of Japan. We now see that over another very large naval movement of a ton of even like Brazilian people that were just recruited now makes a landing, a very risky landing from like Madagascar all the way up into Sri Lanka. And from there, these guys just start moving up. These guys, if we look at the religion map, you can see that there's a lot of green religion people down here who are very, very passionate about their religion. So obviously these people are pretty wanting to come back. And so we see that all these guys are also going to join up and rebel away from their main country, their current occupier. And we now see that this vital city falls, and these guys are also sending support down here, and all of that. And their capital is now threatened as well. Moving back over to Europe, Austria starts their final little gambit over here. They make a very large push over into Tuscany, taking over most of their core territory. However, the same happens to Denmark, who gets absolutely obliterated in the north as they lose their capital, and all these northern areas soon fall, with the rest of them now coming under the control of Austria. Over here, Austria's troops, who are extremely exhausted, now start getting pushed back by these guys over here, as well as these guys. They're now pushed back to their border on the eastern half. Over here, with one last push, the red team finally gets rid of Egypt Oman. However, there is now a little bit of an issue, which is that they now need to go up and fight these guys. So they haul up all their remaining troops, and none of them want to fight anymore. In fact, a heavy portion of them go ahead and join the Golden Horde armies. So with that, we see that things don't look too good for the red team, as the last third of their military that's left alive, literally it killed 2/3 of their soldiers. Of that last third, about another 2/3 of that third now join these guys' army. So these guys now have 1/9 of their original army, and are severely dropped in the power rankings. And so we see that they crumble, as they also have a ton of ethnic groups all over the place. Their core religion is actually kind of small, so obviously that's not going to go too well. And yeah, they die. Egypt Oman is occupied, but they are they're just dead. Let's be real here. So yep, and yep. Now moving back over to Asia, we see that the liberation peoples down here, well, they do not sink the world, they do just push up here. Because, there's a lot of also native people here who want to be freed as well. This extends over to the Philippines, these aren't even native people, these are the Chinese Empire people, the formerly Upside Down Triangle Alliance, that then got annexed by Korea, who now want their independence back. These countries all rise up, and soon enough the Liberation Front meets up with the naval invaders over here in Bengal Falls. Over here, we now see a massive sweep beam moved across China. However, before the sweep beam gets to their developed areas, China makes the tough decision to actually just willingly surrender. Korea does not do the same, and they are much harder to defeat, but eventually their capital is taken, and they're reduced to this vital city in North Korea, which is then falls as well. The war is officially reduced to just Europe, and at that, reduced to just these guys. Unless I'm stupid, right? But yeah, no. This is just It's just these guys left, just Austria. And so with that, we see that a grand sort of return happens. A ton of these areas just instantly rebel, because, I mean, this is like, it's like if France was trying to control all of England. Like, obviously it's not going to work for too long, especially considering that all these guys' troops are dying. They are exhausted. Oop. And so Tuscany is left as, Vienna is left as just their homeland. And we now see that their final sort of push now starts. All over, sweeping movements are made across the country, taking vital city after vital city, and eventually landlocking them. They reached just their core territory, as the Ukrainians and Golden Horde and Blue Team and Spartans and Egyptians coming from the north, and from the west over here, along with the Slovakians and all that, Hungarians, that's what I call them. And eventually, Tuscany starts their final push to end this war. And after probably about 6 years of fighting, the war is finally over as Austria's capital is taken by Tuscany. And with that, the Square Alliance has won the war. It is by far the bloodiest war ever fought in human history. Obviously, this colony is no longer Denmark's, because it is independent now anyway, so let's just make it like a random color, because, like, it's the, new country. But yep, there we have it. The peace treaty will not be this episode, because that would take too long. But yeah, Order 1 is over. So goodbye. Well, yeah.